Hi there, this is Dilys Gayan from dilysgayan.com, the place where business owners and salespeople discover how to attract, convert, and retain more of their ideal clients. And welcome to the Inspired podcast, where I have a fantastic guest with me today, George Bronten. I've practiced that to make sure that I pronounced it correctly. And George is a lifelong entrepreneur with 20 years of experience in the software space and a real passion for sales and marketing. So a man after my own heart. And I absolutely love George's life motto, which is don't settle for mainstream. And he is always looking for new ways to achieve improved business results using innovative software, skills, and processes. And George is also the founder and CEO of Membrane. And this is the world's #1 sales effectiveness CRM for complex business sales. And today, George is going to share his story with us as to how he went from mainstream to selling more of the complex B2B sales. And he's going to share the challenges that he had on the way and some of the mistakes that he found that he was making himself. And more importantly, he's going to share how to overcome those challenges and how to avoid those mistakes so that you can become more of a successful entrepreneur and business person or salesperson, just like George. So over to you, George, please. I'm really looking forward to hearing more about your story.
Thank you. Nice to be on the show.
You're welcome.
Thanks for having me. Yes, so where should I start? I guess if we go back to my first real business that I founded, it was called Upstream. And I really like the brand name of Upstream because, like you mentioned, my motto in life is not to settle for mainstream.
I like that.
So I'm always trying to find things that we can improve. And with Upstream, it all started really that when I found a piece of software that back then, and this was 96, I think, allowed us to share an internet connection between computers in a network. And back then, this was new.
Yeah.
And my little company now, we were 2 people, and we were helping other companies design web pages. And like many other entrepreneurs back then. And really, my designer was really upset with me because he couldn't use the internet because I had the internet connection on my PC. And we couldn't afford to have another internet connection. And when we found this piece of software that was designed by a person in New Zealand, I was just so amazed with the concept and idea that someone in New Zealand, in his dorm room, created this piece of software that was much better than all these tech giants products out there, and specifically much more affordable. So I really fell in love with that concept of software that you can actually create something that makes people's lives so much better. So that was how it all got started, really. And then I tried to find more of these golden nuggets, these products that were sort of had the guts and the innovation levels to challenge the Microsofts and the Oracles of the world. And then I guess that's what led me to all of the mistakes I've made when it comes to selling. We did a big shift after a number of years where we wanted to grow the company. And one of the conclusions was that we were selling very low priced products. So this example that I gave you cost maybe 150 euros per license. So we had to sell a lot of them, which we did, but it was very difficult to grow the company on that type of transactional volume products. So I wanted to increase the average order value, and we started looking at the customers we had and say, how can we get closer to their business challenges? Because that's how we thought we could sell them something that of higher value. And the companies we were helping were IT service companies. And after interviewing about 350 of these in person over a year's time, it sort of dawned on us that, wow, these companies, they're struggling not with having too few products to sell or resell, or not that they're not skilled at what they do, but their business model was flawed because they were selling something. Um, they were selling their hours, basically, time and material, when things broke.
Mm.
So we sort of wanted to help them change that into instead charging for the guarantee that the IT they delivered, the computers, the networks, and all of these things should work.
Mm.
So you should switch your model, and we found a piece of software that could automate like 80% of the proactive tasks that they should be doing to prevent the firefighting.
Yeah.
But that moved us from selling something that cost 150 euros to an average deal value of about 65,000 euros.
Quite a shift, George.
A
Quite a
big shift.
Yeah. That
And
wasn't steps, was it? That was
no,
like
exactly. Those were tiny steps. We just, it was a big shift.
Yeah.
And what I didn't realize at the moment is that not only was it a big shift in the average deal value, but it was a huge intrusive solution to these companies because they now had to reshape almost everything inside of their business.
Mm-hmm.
They had to remodel the price model. They had to remake how they deliver their services, how they price it. Everything had to be remodeled, basically. Which is very intrusive and makes the sale, of course, a lot harder.
Mm.
But it went very well. We sold it when I was selling it, and I brought in my younger brother. We sold it successfully. But then I started to bring on salespeople, and it just didn't work.
Mm.
I couldn't get them to sell this product. And so I hired people and I fired people. I used the best recruiting companies. I paid through my nose.
Mm.
But it just didn't happen. So I spent a lot of money, and then I just sat down and said, George, all of these people that you've hired and fired can't be the problem. You must be the problem.
Yeah, that was very bold of you to do that because many people would just blame everyone else. And
yeah,
so that was a great move on your part, in fact.
Yeah, I had been blaming the other people for quite a while. But at the end, you have to just realize that I'm the only common denominator, and I'm the issue. So I started to study everything about selling. Sales management, sales process, sales methodologies. And I quickly realized that, yes, I had made a lot of mistakes. And my conclusion was really that I was assuming the wrong things.
Mm.
I was assuming that salespeople who had sold something for someone else could sell for me.
Mm.
That was probably the main problem,
or
faulty assumption that I did. And I was also assuming that salespeople were disciplined.
Yeah.
Which was very stupid of me, because after studying a lot of psychology and behavioral motivational books, you realize that we're not really wired for discipline as human beings. We have to work on that. And then thirdly, I had the assumption that the CRM system and the technology that I had in place was going to help me sell, and make the salespeople better. But they were also designed with these assumptions that salespeople know what to do. They should just log whatever they did into the system, and that can be helpful, but it doesn't help them in the how to go about to sell effectively.
Yeah. And I think, it's really interesting when you're talking about assuming that they're able to sell and having the discipline. And certainly from my many years of experience, not having the skill can impact also on the discipline. There Absolutely. Are still those who have the skill who aren't as disciplined, but I think it's impacted even more if they don't have the skill. Because and I'm a true believer that no one gets up in the morning and decides to do a bad job. They do what they think is the right thing.
Yes.
In terms of the skill.
Yes, and I think because we're kind of lazy by nature, if I can use that word, we have a tendency to do what we have done in the past. So sometimes when salespeople say to me, I have 10 years of sales experience, sort of challenge them on that. Do you have 10 years of sales
Mm-hmm.
experience, or do you have 1 year multiplied by 10?
Yeah.
So because
That's right.
we can get stuck in our ways. And I think what you're saying is absolutely true. If you don't have the skills, or if you feel uh, challenged in this new world of selling with the hyper competition that we have, then of course that will affect your discipline, because you start doubting your own skill sets.
Mm.
So yeah, it all goes together, right? As
Yeah.
human beings.
Yeah, exactly. So what did you do then once you identified this within yourself, that maybe you could do something different with the salespeople you were bringing in? What happened then?
Yeah, so then I started to try to identify what I was doing that was different from what they were doing, or vice versa,
Hmm.
and sort of lay that out visually. And one typical example and a typical mistake that salespeople were making was that they went to the owner of this company, in this case, the IT service company,
Mm.
and they said, oh, how would you like to go from 1% profit margins to 28% profit margins? And of course, the owner and the CEO, they were all excited, and
Mm.
yeah, we want that. And they went from having that fantastic and positive meeting to sending a proposal.
Mm.
And of course, they never won, or very rarely won those deals, because unless you convinced the technical people
Yeah.
that this was a good idea, they were very fearful, because they thought, okay, now the boss is buying automation to get rid of my job.
Yeah.
So of course they became very hostile and negative, and tried to convince the boss that this is a really, really bad idea, and that they already had all the technology and tools they needed.
Mm.
So that's one example, that they just didn't identify all the stakeholders, and they didn't communicate the right value to the right stakeholder.
Yeah. Yeah.
A classic. Talking about price too early. All of these
Mm.
things that
Mm.
we know that it's easy to make these mistakes. And really it's about skills, but it's also about discipline, because even a senior person can sometimes jump ahead. And
That's
it's like,
right.
oh, this was such a good meeting. I mean, I don't think the CEO told me that he's going to make this decision by himself. He doesn't need to get any approval from
Mm.
anyone. And you sort of take that face value, and then you lose the deal, and I should have known better.
Mm.
So that goes back to discipline, right? So the conclusion was that I have to sort of visualize what we have to do, and which questions we have to ask, how we should ask them, who we need to speak to about what and when.
Mm.
How can I get that out in sort of a map that a new hire can look at and say, okay, I get that. And what do you mean by this? And then there's actually enablement and educational content inside of that map, so to speak.
Yeah, fantastic. And
Yeah.
again, I'd just really like to pick up on that, because if you create this map and this visual piece of work that when a new hire comes in, all you have to do is pull that out. You don't have to keep repeating it and taking someone through that whole process from cold, because you've got it there for them to be able to refer to. So you can take them through it, but they've also got it
Yes.
ongoing. And I see this missing so many times.
Yes, definitely. And that brings us to process. So when I created this map on a piece of paper, I sort of realized that what I'm trying to do here is to create a process that's visualized,
Mm-hmm.
but also contains sort of a methodology and a shared language on how do we speak about our deals and our opportunities and our customers.
Yeah.
Because I saw that a lot of these salespeople, they had sold something for someone else, and they've learned something going to sales training,
Mm-hmm.
and they were using different words than I was using, or and another colleague was using. So that also caused a lot of friction. So
Mm-hmm.
and then I looked at this CRM that I had at the time, which was a Norwegian piece of software, which was quite nice. I really liked it as a pure CRM where you log
Mm-hmm.
stuff, but I couldn't get that map into it, because I think I had that visual on my piece of paper, but because I'm a software person,
Yeah.
I wanted it to be in the computer. I wanted them to work with this process
Yes.
every day, and they'd be reminded, oh, I forgot about the technicians this time. I have
Yeah.
to go back,
Yeah.
and not to go look for some kind of laminated piece of paper that they have in the office, but they should live and breathe the process, so it becomes second nature to them
Mm.
after a while. And all these CRM systems weren't really designed for that, which was the idea behind my new company, Membrane, is that
Mm.
really, how do we make a process both informative and actionable? And that's a big
Yeah.
challenge.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
process, as you know, when you start talking about process, a lot of people roll their eyes like,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah, and they
no,
have to
don't
see
go there.
they have to see the why behind it, don't they? They have to see the
Yeah,
benefits of being able to use that and how they can use it not just to track the business, not just to follow the process and get success, but also to use it as a business development tool for future
yes.
business.
Yeah, and then you have the next thing that I realized pretty early on in this with this work is that what really drives someone to perform better. Uh, and when I thought about this, is really for myself, what has made me perform better is when I've had someone, of course, motivation to go from A to B, but also had someone who have coached me,
Mm.
has asked those intelligent questions that make me or help me identify the obstacles
Mm-hmm.
and how to get over them without actually telling me how to do it. So
Mm.
having a good coach, I think, is invaluable in selling. And I realize that a lot of sales managers don't do this well.
Mm.
And they're just bogged down in all these reports, Excel spreadsheets, forecasts that are always wrong.
Yeah.
And so coaching sort of became also one of my passions. How can we make it easier for managers to coach, and how can we get some of these boring parts of management off the table so we can free up time to coach?
Mm.
So that's also one of the things that I'm really passionate about, how to do and how to help. And I've written a lot about this lately, about them just having the right mindset to coach.
Mm.
I can talk about that forever. I think we're
Yeah,
doing a lot of mistakes there. We promote the best salespeople who don't have that mindset, and then
that's
we
right.
wonder why they don't perform as managers.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And I'm sure that you've seen this too, where managers will monitor results, so they'll
Hmm.
just monitor the numbers. They'll monitor the activity that has given those results, and then it stops. And they
Right.
just, they say, well, you need to do more of this, or you need to do more of that, or you need to convert more of these, rather than going deep and looking at the competency or
Yeah.
competencies that drive the activities that then
Yeah.
in turn drive the results. And it's improving the competencies and this coaching that is so important. Honestly, you're lighting my fire, George, because this is my passion. Absolutely, everything that you have said is resonating with me 100%. I'm loving it, and I'm hoping that the listeners are getting a lot from this.
Yes, and I think when it comes to coaching, what I found was difficult was if I was looking into my old CRM, what I saw was a pipeline of different deals in
Mm.
different stages, and those stages were tied to probabilities. But I I had to work very hard to understand why the salesperson had put that into stage 3.
Mm.
So I have to like read a lot of activities and ask a lot of questions, because there were no milestones and activities within the stages to get to
Mm.
the next. So it's back to that assumption that the salesperson knows exactly what to do
Mm.
and when to move things. And there were no toll gates. Like, did you actually have the customer on the same page as yourself when you say you're in stage 3 and you're forecasting this as a 80% likelihood of closing? And they would look at me as like, what do you mean exactly? Or do you have the technicians on your side?
Mm.
Mm, yeah, I've spoken to some of them and they seem to like it. And you hear that, oh, this is not
Yeah,
good enough.
yeah,
I need to know. I need you to always ask these three questions to these people, and that's what I wanted to sort of systematize, if that's an English word. So I wanted to
Systemize, yeah.
systemize. Yes, I wanted to go in to this map, look at the map, see the process. What have you done? What have you not done? Who have you talked to? What do they think about this? What questions have you asked and what were their responses? Not your interpretations of their replies, but their actual responses. I want to see that. And based on that, I don't have to ask you any questions. I would know how this particular opportunity feels, or with the health of each opportunity. And that becomes so much easier to coach, because then I can go in and I can say, okay, doesn't know how they will make their decision. Okay, so why are you planning to go and present your solution if you don't even know on which criteria this client is gonna make their decision? You just have to rewind the tape like 3 weeks, because you're just happy ears. You have happy ears on. This is not going to close.
Yeah. Can you give us an example of that, George? Just to kind of put some context around it.
Of what specifically?
Of this, one of your salespeople where they've just assumed that it was going to go into stage 3, but they weren't on the same wavelength. They weren't, they hadn't asked the right questions to ensure that it absolutely was robust and could move to that stage 3 and being 80% or more likely to close.
Yeah, I think the number one problem people make, or salespeople make, there is that they speak to far too few of the stakeholders. So they have one or two people that they are very comfortable speaking to. They've built a pretty good, solid relationship with those two people, but they have not asked those difficult questions about, okay, how will this decision be made internally? Which other people will be affected by this decision if you would go ahead and say yes? What happened the last time you did something similar? Which people were involved back then? How did that go? What do you think? Just talking through how a decision will be made is something I see very often is forgotten in the eagerness to sell. And of course, another one would be competition, not really understanding the incumbent. So because I think going back to the laziness of people, most of us are lazy, which is why most of the time the customer ends up not doing anything, not buying the competitive product, but they're just sticking to what they had. Maybe they do some tweaks, but they keep using whatever they were using before. They know it's not perfect, but it's much less energy for them to continue doing that than to go out and really make a big shift. So I think those are two classics. And of course there are others that could be brought up, but I think those are really the main ones. Not understanding the decision team. And we've read this, right? There's so much, all these studies coming out saying that. I think CB a couple of years back, the corporate executive board, the Americans, brought out this number that everyone was repeating, that there were 5.8 stakeholders in an average B2B deal, and now I think they've upped that to 6.8. And I think that's just because of the world becoming a more complex place. Everything is more interconnected, especially in IT. All the systems talk to each other, so you have to involve all these different department heads in order to get them to reach consensus. So the world is just becoming a lot more complex.
Definitely. So from your experience then, George, when you we know that you have to involve more stakeholders, what would your advice be to people in terms of being able to bring those different stakeholders together, either on a call or conference call or in a meeting, whatever, and to be able to have a conversation that will resonate with each one, because each one will have a different motivation to buy or a different motivation to say yes to move to the next stage?
Yes, I think that's a very interesting question, because I think it can be done wrong. I think if you're having, in marketing now, there's a lot of talk about personas, and you should have different messaging based on each persona. And I think you could make some mistakes there, because you have to have sort of a joint value proposition for the entire group. And if you start making that into too many different value propositions, I think you can actually shoot yourself in the foot, so to speak, and actually delay the decision, or end up losing the entire deal. So I think it's really important to have that shared value proposition of IT automation. If you talk about that as an example, because that's what I talked about with Upstream, it's really about becoming more profitable from the business perspective. It's becoming a better service provider, so you have higher quality of service for your clients. It's about your clients having the business continuity, is a hot word in that space. Customers want their machines to work all the time. They're not happy that they have to call you and you come up and fix it. They're happy when it just works, right? So I mean, so there has to be a shared value proposition, and then you can, to get the motivation of each individual. That's, I think, when you need to come down to maybe more specific value propositions. Like for the technicians, we usually said, do you like sitting at the office every once in a month when Microsoft has released all their patches to make sure that they are installed or on all your customers' machines, and you're sitting there eating pizza, and it's really boring work. Is that why you became an IT technician? And they say, no, I hate that. Yeah, that you can get rid of that. You can automate. That's a typical task that you should not have to do. And instead of doing that, you can free up time so you can do the fun projects. So that resonates with them, but it still you still have the overarching value that you're providing a better service to the clients, while also increasing the profits for the company. That allows you to get more competitive and learn more, get more education and skills and all that good stuff.
And of course, when you're working with more of the same client, so if you've got these particular clients as ideal clients, you become familiar with common problems, with common aspirations, with common objections. Like, you brought in about the technical department thinking, oh my goodness, they're going to automate, we'll lose our jobs, but what would be the benefits to those? And so having an ideal client or clients gives you those insights, makes you more knowledgeable, and helps you be that trusted expert where people are looking for insights from your knowledge.
Exactly. And we see that now in selling, right? Everyone is afraid that they will be out of their job because of artificial intelligence. So we all have to think about, okay, how can we provide more value? How can we as salespeople be the value? And that comes back to skills, knowledge, process, and value propositions. So definitely you have to be that value today.
I don't think you can survive without being that and being really good at what you do. Sorry, go on.
I mean, just the opposite is also true, right? If you're selling something very transactional, you can automate that today. So you don't really need a salesperson. If I'm going to buy a new PlayStation game for my son, I would just go online, search for it, and buy it. Right? I don't have to call anyone and ask how to get it. So I think there's definitely a polarization going on, where with e-commerce, simple things can be sold transactionally, but on the other side of the spectrum, that's where it's getting more complex, right? And you have this hyper competitiveness, and you have to be the value. And there's such a big gap. I mean, you and I seem both to be very passionate about coaching and selling as a profession. But when I talk to clients, a lot of the times the basics are not there. They're like you mentioned with the goals, they only have revenue goals. They've not broken those down, or they don't even have a process. They believe they have a process because they have a drop down in the CRM, but that's not really a process.
That's right.
So we can do so much better by just taking one step at a time and becoming more professional in how we execute a sales strategy.
And I talk about this many times, and so the listeners may have heard this before, but I have seen where a salesperson will join a company, they get masses of product training. They get about that much sales training. If they're lucky, they get a half day out with the manager. If they're very lucky, they'll maybe get a 1-day sales training course. They get practically nothing in prospecting.
Mm.
The manager gives them their target, and the manager checks the numbers as to where are you against this target. If they're not reaching it, which in many cases they're not, because I read some research recently where 18.6% of salespeople are leaving their employer every year. That is big numbers and big costs to the companies too.
Yep.
So they don't hit the numbers. The manager puts pressure on. The salesperson feels a failure. They get frustrated. They get into the blame culture. Eventually they lose the passion that they had when they very first started, and they leave.
Yes.
And because they're a salesperson as a profession, they join another company and they go through rinse and repeat.
Yeah. I agree. And it goes back to that assumption, right? That they're salespeople, so they should know how to sell.
Yeah. And you said something really quite interesting before when you said they were using different words to the words that we use in our company, but they wouldn't know your words unless you train them. And you've got to actually train people how to do something. Then you can coach them.
Yes. And when you train them, what happens is that unless you reinforce that training, they forget it.
Yeah.
And that's what I see a lot. So we do work a lot with sales trainers and sales strategists in order to prevent what their problems, which is they go out and they do a training with a customer, salespeople and sales managers, and then these people go back to their daily work, and there's nothing connecting the training with their daily work. Because they're just going back to logging their stuff in the CRM and all that stuff. So I think it's really, really important to reinforce the training. Or another thing that I'm seeing is that you train the salespeople, but you don't train the sales managers.
Yeah.
Which is complete madness. How are they supposed to train the salespeople on a training they haven't even attended?
Yeah.
So there's so many crazy things happening out there today. So, and I think it needs to go back to basics.
I absolutely 100% agree. And it's not hard, but people are not taking the time to get it right in the beginning. So, companies need to get their sales managers up and effective. And then in turn, the sales managers can bring on salespeople and help them to become effective and efficient with everything that you've talked about, in terms of the skills that they need, the attitude that they need, and the disciplines, and then having a system that sits behind that to be able to take them through, like the system that you've been referring to. So, George, this has been absolutely fantastic. I've loved having this conversation with you. So if anyone wants to get in touch with you, where can they do that? Or how can they do that?
LinkedIn is my favorite social platform. So just Google for me on LinkedIn and send a connection request. I accept everything unless it's something shady. And of course, go to membrane.com where we share a lot of resources, white papers on process and methodology and how to set that up. And those are all free. So that could be useful.
Fantastic. And just spell your surname for us again, George.
Bronten.
Yes.
Bronten.
Excellent. It's actually spelled very simply. It's just not pronounced in quite the same way.
Yeah, it's that E that messes it up.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So thank you so much for your insights. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you, and I hope you'll come back and talk to us again and give us some more insights as to what you found, particularly from that research of 150 clients, which must have given you some massive insights.
That was good fun.
Excellent. Thanks a lot then, George. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.